up to Vav. We're up to Vav Amid Aleph. We are up to Vav Amid Aleph. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Right over there. Amar Rabbi Yehuda.
Where is that?
In the left-hand column, 6A1, Amar Rabbi Yehuda. We're on the dot. So, yesterday's dot was this very interesting dot about marking graves. Why do we put up what's known as a tziyun, as a grave marker? And the answer, bottom line, is to protect people from becoming contaminated by walking on top. And then we had 1,000,001 rules with regard to that. Okay? Now let's continue the conversation. And as you can see, the article actually uses the words. The Gemara continues its discussion regarding markings for Tumah. Okay, so Amar Rabbi Yehuda, if one found a single stone that is marked with lime, that was the paint that was used to say we've got a body here. That indicates tachter tameh, that under the area right under the stone is tameh. Shtayim, if you found two stones, the area between the two stones is just if there's lime on the ground between the stones, b'nayim tameh, then in between is tameh. But the stones themselves and anything outside the stones is tahar, is pure. And if there's no line between the stones, b'nayim tar, that the area between them is judged tar, and the stones themselves are considered the tameh. Says the Gemara. Is that a fact? Even though you did not see that the area was plowed between the stones, how can you deem it that it's tar? This is about, yesterday we learned about something called the Beis HaPras, which was a field that was plowed over. There may have been bodies in the field, but it's all been plowed over, which means that the bones have all been broken out into very smaller than any kind of shear of tunnel. And we said as soon as you blow, you use a bellow to blow your back, essentially, you're good to go. Okay? So here we say that means, so now I had two stones. And in between the two stones, it looks like regular hard dirt that was never plowed. How could you say that there's nobody in there? But Tanya, we learn, if one finds a single marked stone, underneath that stone, we have to assume there's a tameh. Shtayim, if I found two stones, two marked stones, the area in between the two stones, this area over here, if there's signs of plowing between them, right, then it would be tahar, because we say the ball, anything in there would have been broken into two smaller pieces. But if it's not plowed, then we say because I've got a limestone here and a limestone here, right? Therefore, anything in between them that's not plowed is got to be considered tameh. So how do you explain the contradiction between this paraisa and the previous one that seems to indicate that if there's no painting on the ground in the middle, I don't have a problem? Okay? Everybody understand? Good. This is what we're dealing with. Where the lime that was poured on the stone, by definition, poured out and trickled out onto the ground in between. Okay? So that if there's signs of plowing between them, b'nayim tar, because it's reasonable to say that the plowing of the line peeled off the line that you must have put, the what he called that was there. It peeled, the plowing itself took the line that was on the stones and pushed it onto the ground. You know what happens when you do things get moved around. They employ, but if not, the line that's on the ground over here, is meant to be there, and that means that that area is Tomei as well. Okay. So before we go further, I just want to just take a moment. This was the Gemara. This is the continuation of the Gemara yesterday, and of course the question goes, come on. We think about gravesites. There's a cemetery. There are signs. There are grave markers, right? Monuments. What's going on? And yesterday we learned that the monument is never on the body itself. It's always above the head. It's always slightly off the body, because if it was on the body, then people would stand directly on it, and it would be tummy. But we forget the world that we're living in, the world that we live in today. We have to constantly remember the world that we're living in today is a chidush, is a novelty when it comes to the history of the world. The history of the world tells you something else entirely. That people died and they buried them where they found them. Where people died, they buried them in the woods. They buried them wherever it is. It was haphazard half the time, especially Jewish history, where Jews were running from one place to the next. So the perfect example is my father, Daddy, you probably remember this, when we went to Auschwitz a few years ago. And we walked, it was a cold, rainy day, and my father insisted on walking along the track so he should be able to feel somewhat what his great-grandparents felt when his grandparents, my great-grandparents, were taken to Auschwitz. And we got all the way to the back by Birkenau. Auschwitz is the front, Birkenau behind. And you got to the bombed-out crematorium, and that's where, unfortunately, close to 1 million Jews were killed in a month and a half. From literally early May to the middle of June. And my father, without a minion, was so taken up that actually said Kaddish right over there. But what occurred to me was that place is an absolute Makan Kaddish. It's a holy place, because you're dealing with people who were killed just because they were Jews. There's nothing higher than that. But the ground itself is filled with the DNA of our people, with 1 million of our people. This is similar, Daddy. I don't know. Did you come with us to the Ukraine to Bar that where they killed the Jews by the woods?
Babi
Yar. So it turns out that there is a Goyish cemetery in front of Babi Yar for about a mile. You get to Babi Yar is right up against the woods. And the only reason why you know anything is there because the Jews put up a menorah.
Otherwise, it looks like a nice meadow.
It's like a meadow. Exactly.
You would never know that underneath.
And if you listen, you hear the wind blowing through the forest. And it's like you can hear the cries of 30,000 Jews that were killed. But that period, that was Jewish history. Once you think about that as Jewish history, this Gemara becomes more alive. You realize that this Gemara was our history, unfortunately. And so where people were buried or not became an absolute vital thing. Most of them which died without a headstone, of course. All right. If the picture a field, okay, a square field or a rectangle field, if one side of the strip is marked with lime, that means that area is tamei, everything else is okay. We're on 6A2 now. Shnayim, Haim Tameim, V'chol Asada Kula Tahira. They are tamei and the rest of the field is tahar. Shloisha, if 3 sides are marked, Haim Tahir, V'chol Asada Kula Tahir. But if the full, all 4 sides are painted with lime, so that then we look at it different. Then it comes in just the opposite. Haim Tahirin, they're the marker to tell us that the entire field is contaminated. Because we learned when we do not distance a marker from the location of the tumah, he shouldn't waste space in Eretz Yisrael. Because if you keep on, so let's say the dead is here, and you put the marker there, everything between the marker and here you're not going to use. And that's a waste of Eretz Yisrael to land. We've applied this, of course, in Chutz as well, but that's the idea. No, it does not. So what it turns out is two different things. One, the main part of putting up the tziyah is for tumah purposes. Don't become contaminated. But there is another thing. Obviously, it has another reason on a much higher spiritual level, that here is the place that one comes to final resting place of a person. And we use the tzion as essentially the history of the person, in very short. Right? Who was this person? Right? In a few lines, we state who this person was. But you're asking a question that's a very good question. We try not to deify the dead. You know the famous thing in the Torah, it says, Achrei Moed Kadosh. Those are two different parashas. After the death of Aaron's son, and then the next parsha is Kadosh, you shall be holy. But the joke is, Achrei Moed, after death, Kadoshim, you become holy. In other words, what do we do to people after they pass away? We make them holy, which is great. It's a wonderful thing. We only look at their good points. And that's beneficial to them in the world to come, by the way, because the way they're remembered here is the way they judge them there. But having said that, we don't like the idea of, because it takes your eyes off the ball. The great issue with Hasidus, from the point of view of the Vilna Gaon and others, was this focus on the tzaddik, on the righteous one, on the rebel. They felt it was too much focus on one human being, and you were turning him into a demigod. That itself is a far too dangerous a thing. When you check your brain at the door, oh no, if you don't mind, can you get me a latte, please? Yeah, hot latte, please, thank you. This one's on me. Too late. Okay. Sheesh. Okay. I'm sorry. The boundaries, the coffee boundaries, Daddy, on this table. Try to pay for your own coffee. It doesn't work. It's marked off. It's demarcated. Anyways. So the Ab ala Kalayim. Also, the Shliach Bezdin, the agents of the court, go out to inspect the field for Kalayim. What happens? Things start growing, and what do we see? That two species are growing too close to each other. They have to come along and rip it out. We've been through this many times before. Multiculturalism is not something that the Torah likes. The Torah likes people with distinct personality. And that goes to shatnez, that goes to animals grazing together, and that goes with grains as well. Why Chalamoid Pesach? Because that's when things grow, of which the Gemara asks, why did they have to go out on Chalamoid? Let them go out earlier. Here in middle, we actually learned the Echad Ba'adar in the first of Adar, that's a month and a half before Chalamoid Pesach. Bashmian ala shkolim ala klayim. Bezdin announces regarding paying up the shkolim, that is the half shekel that everybody pays in to start to refinance the Beis Hamikdash. And regarding klayim, that everybody should know to be careful not to plant things together. And on the 15th, they read the Megillah in the walled cities. Meaning they're on the 14th, and they're halfway through the month is the 15th, the reading of the Quran. The Yoitzin, and that's when they go out. The Kavitz, it's a Durochim, the Sakina Rechavos. to clear the thorns and repair the roads, because we're now within 30 days of Pesach, which of course everybody comes up to Jerusalem. The loimed amikvayis, and they measure the mikvahs to make sure they have enough water in there, that they have enough water, i.e., 40 saw. A mikvah is not kosher. A ritual bath is not kosher if it falls less, if the water level is less than 40 saw. The ice in cold rabbim, and they attend to all the public needs. And umitzayin is a kiboros. They mark the graves so that the kahanim that are coming shouldn't get metame by stepping on them. The yoitzin ala kalayim, and they go out to inspect the kalayim. So when do they go out? On the 15th of Adar, not 30 days later on Chalamoy Pesach. And for the Gemara, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yosef ben Chanina. Chad Omar, now we're on 683. Chad Omar kan be'vochir kan be'opil. Here the Mishnah is dealing with the early crop, and here it's dealing with the late crop. Simple. The early crop, you go out on the 15th of Adar. The late crop, you go out on the 16th and 17th of Nisan. The Mishnah is dealing with grains. Here we're dealing with vegetables. The grains are grown in the field that they start sprouting already in Adar. So you can already see what's going on. Vegetables take a little longer to get going, and you've got to wait until Nisan. By the way, these deadlines of the 15th of Adar or Chalamoy Pesach are not fixed and solid. That is the normal way of doing things. That's when the sprouts, as they come up, are unclear what they are. But if the sprouts are recognizable before then, or any time in the middle, of course you immediately have a chiyuv to rip them out. Okay, so these deadlines are only the normal procedure. But obviously, so says the Gemara, what's so special about Chal HaMoed that we go out to search for Kalayim? Let's go out before or after the Yom Tov. No biggie. Because the schar of the inspector's wages, which are reduced for us on Chal HaMoed. Suck Rashi. Rashi is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines from the bottom. Right over there. Kloima, to teach us. You can hire the workers on the cheap. Because nobody's really working on Chal HaMoed. So therefore, supply and demand. You got a lot of workers. They're cheaper. Now look at Taisus. The third Taisus on the bottom. The Moizle Gabon. Third Taisus on the bottom. Lamandi Amala Kamon. Later on in the Masechta on the top 13. Schar Pu'ula She'ein Loi Ma Yoichel. The truth of the matter is, how can the workers hire themselves out? They're not supposed to be working on Chal HaMoed. So Taisus says that in fact a person is allowed to hire himself out if he doesn't have what to eat. He's allowed to hire himself out and take his wages because he needs to eat. Also, but according to the one who says even then, they're not allowed to. They have to take from the soup kitchen. I don't know how you're allowed to pay the workers on the Chal HaMoed. The Shema Yesh Shleima, the Hani the mitzvah saturi, that when you hire workers to do a mitzvah, i.e., in this case, to get rid of the kalayim, there you're allowed to do it even on Chal HaMoed. If you want to see it, I think, number 30 on the bottom explains this in English. Right over there. 30 on the bottom explains this in English. Fascinating. Okay? Now, says the Gemara Vaita, so we just did this, right? Amarav Svit Mishmei Rabbi Shashia Shem Shmamino, learn from here. Ki Avinu Le'Schar, that when we pay them the inspectors for the climb their money, Mitruma Salishcha Yahavalo, we actually take the funds out of the Truma Salishcha. Thank you so much. Thank you guys so much. Baruch atah Adonai Melech Haolam she'akol niyeh b'dvaro. Oop, I just burnt my tongue. Here we go. L'chaim, everybody. Wow. Anyway, so give me a second. Let's get. Oh, I love this sugar. Give me a second. So, just give me a second. Coffee looks too good. There we go. Now the day begins. There we go. You know, there's an idea on Yom Kippur, you know, the guy who went out to the midbar to throw the goat down the azazel, that would put food out for him. Even though he never ate, it's called pas pasala. Food in hand. A bird in hand is better than two in the bush. So there we go. So, says the Gemara from here, we take it from the Chumas HaLishcha. Why? Because it's holy work. It's mitzvah work. Right? So you could take it from the treasury. If you're going to say that we pay from the funds from the people who grew the client together, so we penalize them to take it from them, right? Then what's the difference to us? Then let the inspectors make as much money as they can, right? What's the whole point of hiring them on the cheap? So that the shul's budget doesn't get stretched. But if you're looking to penalize the guys who are making them work by pulling up their clients, charge them double. So in fact, the ad kama. So first the Gemara says an ad kama to how much of a variance is considered climb that now need to be uprooted. Amar Rab Shmuel by Yitzchak. Ka'oisa shenino, like we learned in the Mishnah, kol saw sheyesh ba, any saw. That means whatever the size of a saw is. Okay, 50. A base saw is 50 by 50. Kol saw sheyesh ba. Now we're on Amud Base 61. Roivar zera mimin achel. 1/4 cup of different species are mixed in it. Yemayit has to be reduced under the 1/4 amount. Okay, you have to reduce it to less than 1/4 of the amount. Okay, says the Gemara of Tanya, but we learned that the Chazal actually instituted that if they discover client, guess what they do? They make the whole field ownerless. They penalize the guys there. How did you grow client in the first place? With making it ownerless. So how do you see from over here that they can reduce it to less than 1/4, and then the field is good to go? Says the Gemara like Hasha. This is before the enactment that made it ownerless. The Tanya, because they learned. Listen to this. Very shina. In the beginning, the shluchei bezdin, the agents of the court, would come and they would uproot the kalayim for under 1/4, and they would throw it before the owner's animals to eat. So the guys who grew the kalayim were happy for two reasons. One, that the inspectors weeded their fields for them, and number two, that their animals got fed. So the sages then said, forget about, we're not feeding your animals, we're taking this, throwing it on the ground in the ways. But they were still thrilled. At least the fields were being weeded. Right? So the Gemara, then they got really upset. They said, that's it. We're going to make the whole field ownerless. Okay. All right. So that's what happens over here. All right. So now we go like this. Mishnah goes further. We're just going to go to the next Mishnah, and then we're going to stop, which is right. Okay. So, Rabbi Elazar of Yaakov, we could divert water from one tree to another tree on Kalamai. That means if water piles up by one tree, you're allowed to divert it to another tree as long as Mavach la yishka eskala sada. And as long as you don't water the entire field, and as we explained before when we had this in the Gemara, because from tree to tree is not a big tircha. It's not a great exertion. From to water the entire field is a tircha gedola. It takes a lot of effort, and that is not allowed. The zeroyim, right? And zeroyim shaloi sasim l'pnei hamayit. And plants that are not regularly watered before the yontif, lo yashkem b'mayit. You're not allowed to all of a sudden become from and water it, become religious, and all of a sudden start watering it on the holiday. The chachamim matirim mizeh umizeh, and the chachamim allow it one to the other. In other words, who's the chachamim? Rabbi Meir. We had Rabbi Meir that said that if we allow it a little bit, we allow it completely. So he said if we allow it for a hefsid meruba, for financial, that we allow it completely, even if it's for revach, even if it's for profit. You remember that vaguely? We had that Rabbi Meir at the beginning of the Masechta. That's who the chachamim are over here. It's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is saying, listen, you're allowed to do it in where financially for a financial loss. I'm allowing you to use it. Period. That's just the way it is.
Are we diverting the water here? What are we doing?
So we're diverting the water. Exactly.
Diverting by making a trough?
A small one, or you just like from tree to tree. You're just making it like a small dish so that the water trickles from one to the other. That's it. It's not like you're taking a shovel and you can even use your feet. You're just making a little ditch. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda, im sada mitunenes mutter. If the field was a naturally moist field, and for some reason it dried up, it just got very hot and dried up, then obviously you're allowed to water it, even according to according to Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov the Tanakh in the Mishnah. We're up to 62. Tanya Nami Hach, we learned the same thing in a Brisa. When they said that it's prohibited to water them on Chalamayid, that's regarding plants that were never watered regularly before the Yontif. But if they were watered regularly before the Yontif, of course you're allowed to continue watering it on Yontif because you don't have to let them wither. Obviously, that's not the idea. And if the field had been naturally moist and it dried up, you're allowed to water it. But you're not allowed to water a naturally dry field on Chalamayit. In other words, a field that gets its water, it lives on rainwater alone, it would do better if you irrigate it, but it does get enough rain to let it live, right? You cannot do it. The Chachamim Oimrim, that would be Rameir, Matirim Zev says it's okay. If I allow you to do it with financial loss, I allow you therefore to do it. Mutter be part of it, mutter lekula. Amar Ravina, Shma Mino, learn from here. Hai Tarbitza, a garden. Shadili Sarbutse B'chayla Demayit, you're allowed to sprinkle with water on Chalamayit. So us guys who have sprinklers are allowed to have the sprinklers on Chalamayit. Today, regarding a dry field, what is the reason that one irrigates it and does not rely on rainfall alone? It's because even if the irrigation is a revach, it accelerates the growth and renders the late crop an early crop, but the crops are not in danger of being ruined. Same thing over here by the garden. Even if it makes the late crop into an early crop, it's good because if Rabbi says even the revach, we're good to go. Because once I opened up the door completely. Tanu Rabbanan, we may sprinkle a grain field during Shemitah, but not on Chalamayit. Okay? This is again to a Sedei. This is Sedei, what he called. This is I'm sorry. This is where was I? I lost the place. Right. This is the field that gets water from other places and we don't need to irrigate it. we do sprinkle a grain field with water, both on Kalamoid and Shnias. Simple. The one that says you're not allowed to is Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. The one that says you're allowed to is Rabbi Meir. That says once I allow you to do it for financial considerations, I allow you to do it even for profit considerations. Tanya, Edach, we learned my pizza today, love on the Erev Shvi'is, we may sprinkle a grain field with water on the eve on Shemitah. And I don't worry about that by doing it now, I'm benefiting it on Shemitah itself. That what I do now is a direct benefit in Shemitah itself. Today, Shiyotzi Yerakis B'Shvi'is. So nonetheless, that the vegetables will sprout during Shemitah. Okay? So that's the way it works.
So in modern day, if these fields were on timers.
According to this man Amal, you can leave the timer on. But read the next below. Let's just turn the page and then we'll talk about it because this is where we're stopping. We're now on 6b3, and this is where we're stopping at the Mishnah. Elo shemar pizza today l'chol hashvius. You could even sprinkle the field during Shemitah. Kedei shiyotzi yerokas l'matzei shvius, so that the vegetables will sprout after the conclusion of Shemitah. Now, again, this clearly is according to Reb Meir. This is going according to Reb Meir. And whether this is the halacha today or not, I'm not sure. I suspect that it is. Because you have to leave your field fallow for shvius. But you try, part of it is so that the nutrients, HaKadosh Baruch Hu set it up. The reason is the reason. You have to do it. But logically, the reason is so that once every 7 years, you have to let the field rejuvenate itself, its nutrients to rebuild itself back up. If you ever look at farms, you ever notice farmers alternate field crops and alternate fields so that every other year, one field gets time to build up its nutrients.